Olá, meu nome é Liz Cereja e este não é o Criado Solto. Essa é uma colaboração Criado Solto com o podcast do Jovem. Como todo mundo sabe, porque a gente está aqui já há vários episódios, a gente está entrevistando alguns dos principais produtores que vieram para a Feira Naturebas. Então, hoje a gente está aqui com nada mais, nada menos do que John, the Wunderman.
Parece um lutador, né? John, the Wuderman.
É uma brincadeira, mas ele realmente é um homem maravilhoso, um produtor excepcional. Eu sou apaixonada pelo país e pelos vinhos da Geórgia, né? Também, como muita gente sabe que me acompanha. Eu sempre falo que é um dos países que todo mundo que trabalha com vinho ou gosta de vinho tem que conhecer, né? Porque ele muda não só a sua concepção do que é vinho, mas de todo o entorno, né? Do que é essa vida por detrás do vinho, né? Boa parte da ancestralidade que a gente só estuda está lá presente, né? Toda a questão das ânforas, dos métodos ancestrais, dos vinhos de maceração, né? Os vinhos laranja, isso tudo está vivo na Geórgia. Então é realmente assim, um monumento vivo de preservação e de estudo. Por isso que eu sempre bato tanto na tecla de que a gente que estuda vinho, que trabalha com vinho, tem que ir para esses lugares, né, para aprender essa memória viva. E agora mudando o botãozinho da tradução.
Vamos ligar no SAP.
Exato. Apertando a tecla SAP. And now, well, we're going to talk about Georgia, Georgian wines, about all the history behind the amphora and the orange wine. It's not the best name for this kind of wine, but well, the orange wines, etc. And here is John from Pheasant Tears. Very, very amazing producer and also amazing person.
Thank you.
I'm very glad that now also my friend. So welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's our pleasure, and I was going to say my pleasure, but I'm sure Lise feels the same way. And we were speaking earlier, just so you know, this is very informal podcast. You know, you'll see people coming in and out. It's service hours very soon. Yeah, we'll be talking about wine, getting up in the middle of it. If you want, like recite poetry, get up, get a piece of bread. You know, get a coffee. You know, everything is okay. We'll be speaking with the backstage as well. Kalada Izamat, that was interviewed, you know, a few days ago, is watching this interview right behind us in the backstage as well. You can come in, jump on, ask a question, or do whatever you want to do. But man, it's a huge pleasure. When I told some of my followers that I was interviewing you with Lise, there was a lot of commotion. You know, I actually published something about you today, and people went wild about it. And last year at Naturebas, I couldn't even get close to you. It was crazy. Every time I looked at your stand, there was like in Brazil we have this saying where we say there's the biggest soccer team in Brazil is called Flamengo. And whenever there's a lot of people, we say the Flamengo fans were around it because there's so many people. And every time I would look at your stand in Naturebas last year, there was just like so many people that I was like, okay, it's almost inapproachable. Next time I'll go. Yeah. So it's a huge pleasure for me to be sitting so close to you and having this opportunity to talk to you, because you're most definitely a very important figure, a reference when it comes not only to natural wine, but also to this thing that a lot of people don't even know about, but that is so central to the core of natural wine, which is Georgian wine. So I'm gonna obviously pick a lot on this episode, just because she knows your work much more than I do, and she knows Georgian wine much more than I do, and she's visited.
You have to go to Georgia.
I know this is one of the places that I most definitely have to go. But why don't we? I'm gonna shut up for a little bit and let you introduce your project, and for perhaps people that don't even know who you are or what you do, go on. You know, tell us what you do.
Well, I wear a few different hats. I'm started off as a visual artist, a painter, and I still paint. I was curious about early music from around the world and kind of ethnic music, and heard Georgian traditional polyphonic songs when I was 16 years old on a recording, and dreamt to go to Georgia to record them, but that was in 1991, and Georgia was caught between some succession territory wars backed by Russia, and then the eventual civil wars. So 1991 wasn't an easy time to go collect songs. I continued my graduate studies in Moscow, Russia, in painting. But part of the reason I wanted to be there was so I could be a little bit closer to Georgia. I learned Georgian language. I met a bunch of Georgian people, learned a bit about the cuisine, and actually managed to go there in 1995 for the first time. And I was totally enamored with Georgian culture, Georgian music, Georgian cuisine, Georgian people, architecture. I come originally from the US, but always had this kind of curiosity.
From New Mexico, no?
Santa Fe, New Mexico is where I was born, and I grew up in Virginia, went to art school in Baltimore. Ended up finishing art school in Russia. But yeah, there was something very real about Georgia. It was a place where you could cry all of your tears and laugh all of your laughs. There was no plasticity about it. It was a very vibrant, passionate, real place. And 1995, when I went there, I basically saw the capital and the neighboring regions. And in 1996, I managed to go to Kakheti, and that's the eastern part of the country, which is the center of the wine region. And I fell immediately in love and bought a small home there. An art student, as my father reminded me at that time, isn't supposed to buy homes. But it's not how it works. But due to the...
Well, no, it didn't change much in that regard.
But because it was a post-war period and many young Georgians had left to try to earn money elsewhere, and the town that I bought a house in, Signagi, was a bit of a ghost town then. So it was affordable for an art student, and I happened to buy a house in the middle of the wine region, but it also was the region, Kakheti, where I loved the music, first of all, in Georgia. And I finished my art education in Russia, and in 1998 moved pretty much permanently there. From 98 to 2006, I divided my time between making paintings and collecting songs. And then in 2006, we started at the project Pheasant's Tears. It was actually... The idea came from the man who's still my partner in the project, Ela Patelashvili, where he said this in a search for an authentic voice in music. We should do the same thing with wine, because most of the wines that are leaving Georgia today, they don't speak Georgian. And they're not the wines that Georgians like to drink. They're the wines that larger producers think would be successful on international markets. So he said, just like you were curious about the original tuning systems and voice of music and authentic Georgian singing, help me do a project with wine that would echo that same aesthetics. And the genesis of Pheasant's Tears happened in 2006 then. And we actually didn't even know that there was a natural wine movement. Our idea was to do something that was authentically Georgian. And we thought we would use the qvevri, the vessel. We would try to bring back some forgotten or almost forgotten varieties, and we would farm organically because that's what normal people would do. We did spontaneous fermentation. There was no filtration. Again, we were using the qvevri, not because we wanted to be part of the natural wine world, but that was the way wine had always been made in Georgia, and that's what was considered what the Georgians would call nagdi huina, which means the real wine. But the story of an American artist and a Georgian farmer on a crusade to save these geeky, almost forgotten varieties in the land that gave us wine was a story that a lot of journalists picked up on, and very quickly people were writing about us and writing about the wines. And it was the natural wine world that was most curious about what we were doing. So we kind of got grandfathered in for kind of a shortcut through the back door of a movement that was much more bigger than what we imagined.
Damn. I have a million questions about the wine. I'm sure this does as well. But before we get into like the wine or the wines themselves, I have a few questions that are about, perhaps are going to inform not only the viewer but me about like how you approach the winemaking, because I thought it was very interesting when you mentioned that when you moved to Georgia, you learned the language, but you said you also learned the cuisine. And from what I hear, you own some restaurants.
Yes.
And I would like to know how, what kind of relationship you feel between owning restaurants, like being there in the forefront of cuisine and the wines that you make?
In Georgia, it's another level of understanding food and wine.
So, I mean, for me, there's this kind of crossover in wine and food and um, in music and art. There's this kind of this energy, or what we would call overtones in polyphonic songs, or this kind of vibration between the different notes or the chord that's created on the plate in cuisine. And this vibrancy, this energy. When I was traveling to villages to collect the songs, I was eating in families, and the families are making their own sourdough bread. They were fermenting their own vegetables. They're making their own wine. They're making natural wine, but they didn't know the term natural wine. They didn't know
They were making wine.
they didn't know there was a possibility to make non-natural wine. I had never even heard of that. And they were butchering their own animals, distilling what was left over from their winemaking, and I just felt like this incredible vibrant energy in the food and in the wine there that I wasn't finding in the cities. And that was very similar to the musical tradition that was using untempered scales and a way of voice projection that fostered overtones in music. And so for me, the curious thing is how to interact with tradition. In our restaurants, in some cases, we're maybe the most traditional restaurants because we're bringing a lot of forgotten ingredients and forgotten recipes back to the table. At the same time, we'll do something that the French call pastiche, which is like creating a dish that could have been an original dish from a certain time, from a certain region, thinking about those ingredients, but it's actually our entire creative work. But being creative in respect and honoring this kind of huge inheritance that's bigger than us. And with wine, we actually kind of approach it the same way. We first, for the first 15 years, we're kind of trying to understand why certain grapes were growing in certain areas. What was it about the pH in the soil? What was it about the humidity in the air? What was it about the culture and the cuisine where they liked this kind of wine? And after doing kind of 15 years of fieldwork with wine and cuisine, we started trying to make our own contributions creatively to the tradition. And I believe if you love tradition, you can't just render it to being behind glass in a museum. Tradition also needs oxygen. It will die otherwise. You just make it part of the past. So, but it's one thing to say, I know better. It's another thing that I can put some wind in the sails of something that's bigger than me. And this is two very different approaches. So we've done some things in the winery that are very creative, but we've also brought back a lot of forgotten varieties and brought grapes to regions that they stopped growing in Soviet times. So this idea that tradition isn't only museum conservationism, but it's a creative dialogue with that which came before is very important to me as a cook and as a winemaker and as a painter.
Damn. Like, they're so... That was awesome. That was an awesome answer. Thank you.
Sure.
And
Let me just make a little... I think it's important for people to know what is qvevri,
yeah,
because we are talking about qvevri. People don't know what a qvevri is.
sure.
So, very simple question.
All right. So qvevri is basically a terracotta vessel, similar to what in Spain and Portugal they call tinajes, or in Italy amphora. The main difference is the qvevri, which means that which is buried below, is totally buried in the ground, harvesting the thermal temperature of the earth to foster the formation of the wine. So that's the main difference. They can be various sizes, from qvevri that you find in the yards of churches for use in communion can be 50, 60 liters, to qvevri that, or maybe from a powerful farmer in a village that could be 4,000 liters. The predecessor of the qvevri was another vessel called dergi. So when we hear that there were grape pits that were dated back to between 6,000 and 7,000 BC,
Yeah, that one.
10,000 years ago,
Yeah.
the dergis are shorter and squattier and have the ornamentation of grapes on the outside. So that original vessel was called dergi.
Dergi.
And then the dergi later evolved to be the bigger, longer, more elegant quevri.
And it's amazing because in the museum at the capital, you can see and even touch if you want. Of course, you will not, but this query, this old one, 8,000 years.
Yeah, between 8 and 9,000 years. They can't carbon date it more exact than that.
Wow.
So
I mean,
that's why-
I think that's close enough. If it's 8 or 9, I mean, it already shows that it's very, very.
Yeah, but that's why people have this thing with the origins of wine in Georgia, because you can see it.
And it's beautiful to think that the late Neolithic man was already selectively farming grapes at that time. But living in Georgia and knowing the complexity of the history, maybe even more surprising is that they never stopped.
Yeah.
That Georgia is like a land bridge between Europe and Asia. It was the gateway between two different colliding worlds. So every major empire from the east expanding westward or vice versa wanted to be in control of that gateway. And that meant in times of peace, Georgia was very affluent, but it also meant there wasn't peace very often. And yet we don't have a historical precedent when the Georgians didn't bring in the harvest. So the perseverance that they were able to usher 525 indigenous Otacon grape varieties into the 21st century, despite the complex
All
history,
of that.
that is amazing.
That's amazing.
Totally. I want to dive into the wines and talk about like winemaking, grapes, and taste, which is a lot of the things that really interest me. But before I want to take a quick step back because you mentioned the phrase 3 times, and it's one that I've never heard before. And I was the first time you said it, I wanted to ask you. I didn't want to interrupt you. Which is, I went to music school, so music and wine are the 2 big passions I have in my life, and I'm super passionate about these 2 topics, and I think they intersect a lot more than a lot of people think, especially when you think of frequency. Yeah. But you mentioned this term, collecting songs, and I don't think anyone, and I've never thought of music this way, that it's something that you can collect. Why did you use
the mushrooms?
Yeah.
So
well, but it's interesting because mushrooms are tangible, and so the idea of foraging for something that you can grab and hold or collect makes more sense than collecting an intangible. It's like, to me, it's almost like you're saying you travel the world to collect thoughts or ideas. Like, where did that come from?
But basically, in Soviet times, the academic ensembles were basically reinventing Georgian music to be more bombast, to be more powerful, to be a show of power.
Like wines in the 90s after Parker.
Exactly. Or even Soviet period Georgian wines.
There's music and art and food. They are all in the same.
But we went through villages collecting the songs by 4-track recordings and recording and documenting the way the songs were sung by the last bearers of this tradition.
Okay.
And so we built an archive, and it was through building that archive that ourselves and other friends that were working in this direction tried to take off the varnish and understand what the music actually was like before it became for the stage, when it was for family ritual. And it was very interesting from the point of view of texture and from the point of view of voice projection, even from the point of view of the tuning system. So just like sometimes the seemingly unrefined quality of natural wine is not necessarily dissonance, it's a different kind of harmony. And just like
tuning.
Yeah, exactly. Everything that happened pre-Bach, basically.
Exactly.
And for me, that tuning system actually raises the hair on my arms. It's incredibly exciting. And
I never thought of a natural wine like open tuning, but
but
it's a very interesting thought. It's a very, very interesting thought.
Yeah.
Damn.
So,
and before going to the wine, how do you still, or let me rephrase that. Do you think of wine and the aspects and characteristics of wine in terms of musical concepts, or is it the other way around? Or
Yeah, in fact, I have one wine that's called Polyphonia.
Polyphonia.
I have another wine that's called Quinta, based after the interval of fifths,
yeah,
which is the main driving interval in Georgian traditional music. And even when I teach servers in our restaurants and bars how to explain wine, often I say it's easier to make comparisons in music, and sometimes that's a quicker emotional connection than comparing flavors in wine to fruits or flowers, and maybe it's better to compare it to the emotional content of music, and that will help people understand more quickly the energy in the wine that maybe they would like to taste. So yeah, I think it's the emotions that are triggered to music. You can have a direct connection to wine.
so let's go into that. If you were to describe your wines or your winemaking style to someone that doesn't know you, how would you describe it?
Well, in Georgia, as I mentioned before, there's a plentitude of varieties, about 525 different varieties. There's many different soil types, everything from volcanic to clay over limestone to slate, sandstone, and quartz. And then there's regions that are drastically different, both in terms of their food cultures, also in terms of the humidity and temperature. So actually in Georgia, there's a huge spectrum of texture and color in wine, and the way they macerate, the way they don't, and it has to do with pH and humidity and probably gastrocultural traditions. Our work, that Pheasant's Tears kind of was born out of the ethnographic work we were doing with music, meant we were trying to understand all this diversity of texture and spectrum. So we have some very, very light, playful reds with very light maceration that come from the coastal areas and from the mountains on the coast, where there's a lot of humidity that prevents the grapes from getting too high a sugar level. So they're not going to be wines of big body, but it's also from a place where there's a lot of low pH in the soil, so bright acidity in the soil. So you end up with these kind of like very playful, electric light wines, all the way to the deep orange wines of the east, where it's the opposite. The pH is quite high, the acidity is low in the soil, and the tannins are very refined because you have a lot of intense sunlight, dry weather, lots of wind. So they're wines that are naturally more of structure and depth. I think in terms of how we work with white grapes, it's important to notice, to mention that across the country, usually it's macerated wines. But in Imereti, Guria, Samegrello, Achara, usually there's a very light maceration. And in Kaheti, where there's less acidity in the wine, usually a much deeper maceration, heavier maceration. And why we make a lot of orange wines, we have about 17 different cuvées in our portfolio. Excuse me. We do make a number of reds, and we do make a couple of whites without maceration, just because we were curious how the grapes would show in this way. I don't know that we have one style. The style has been trying to feel the harvest, trying to feel, not just put it on the skins if the skins were not in a good condition. Sorry, I'm tickling my throat. But understanding, you know,
Chili.
I don't think so. I think the air conditioning from the airplane. But, for instance, we have a Vardis Peri Rakatsatelli, a kind of pink Rakatsatelli that we always made with skin maceration. But in 22, we made it with no skin maceration because the grapes were damaged by hail. And the juice was in perfect condition, but the skins weren't. Right. So if there's a style, it's trying to not have a strict style and listen to nature. But we also have followed the kind of grandfather's way in Georgia of where there's more acidity in the wine, less maceration, and where there's less than greater maceration. Across the board, we probably pick earlier than our neighbors. I like wines that are on the more refreshing side. And we've also, over time, given preference to using the qvevri, the clay vessel, when it's a wine with focus on maceration and structure. It's very important. If it's a wine that's more leaning towards the side of freshness, brightness, this kind of almost linear tension in the wine, then actually I think stainless steel is also a very good option. So we do some wines now from beginning to end.
I didn't know there's any wines in stainless steel.
And it's really when we want to preserve that pristine kind of energy of the acidity.
Right, a fine fruit, yeah.
Where in the qvevri, it can also make a beautiful wine, but it makes a wine that's more subtle, more layered, more textured, which for me works better, I think, with wines that are more tannic. And we're not dogmatic in this way, but over time, that's been kind of our natural preference when we have the option.
I see. It's interesting. Now that I think of it, I've always thought of maceration similar to what I think of distortion in music. And when I say distortion, what I mean is you can have a distorted sound that is in harmony with the song, but in my opinion, it always shifts you slightly from the clarity of the pure sound. And
you think that in white and reds together?
I think that's specifically in whites. When a white tends to go towards orange. In reds, not so much, because, and this is something that I've created in my head because of like pre-established notions, not so much the wine itself, but it's very rare for us to see a red grape producing a white wine. So the idea of the maceration is kind of already like what the wine in my head is going to be like.
I can be a little bit.
No, I mean this is an opinion. This is an opinion. This is an opinion, of course. But for example, we would never talk about. I mean, or at least I wouldn't. I'm gonna put myself here. I would never talk about the when I say lack of focus. What I mean is the lack of clarity of sharpness that you get in a white wine versus an orange wine. When you think about a red wine, I would never say that the maceration with the skins was what caused that. But this is me.
Yeah, I would
love to hear your guys' opinion, and even especially if you're disagreeing with me, which I know you are because I know you.
I'm afraid I'm probably in Lisa's camp. I think partly for me, it absolutely doesn't matter the color of the grape that you begin with. There's no.
So why did you ask if it was primarily with white wine or red wine?
Because I think there's no difference in aromatics. There's no difference in texture between the juice of a red grape and a white grape. What affects the wine, whether it's red or white or pink or green or purple or any other color, is way we handle maceration. And I think a lot of macerated wines, white from white grapes, if you were to taste from a black glass and you didn't have the attached preconceptions, you would say what a delightfully refreshing light red.
And you're right. And you're right.
And I think for me, we need to talk more about maceration's expression separate from the color of the initial grape. There's a saying that I've said often to you, and that a friend of mine, Sarah Abbott, coined this term once. She's a master of wine from London, who has a big fondness for natural wines, but she hasn't branded herself as a proponent of natural wine. She just, that's what she loves. But she said one time in a OIV Congress in Georgia, she said, the orange wines of Georgia are not the mean sisters of whites. They're the introspective cousins of reds. And
I like that.
And then another quote from my friend Edward Cheppy from Gutatago Winery in Austria. He said once, if we think racism isn't a favorable thing in people, why are we racist with grapes? It doesn't matter the color of the grape when it starts with. You could say that there's a flavor profile that could be slightly different between Grenache Blanc and Grenache Noir, but we recognize them both as Grenache, right? And how we handle maceration, is this a light and playful wine or a structured and philosophical wine? that's a different story. But I would make an argument that if we talk about a terroir-driven consciousness, then there's certain aspects of terroir that get absorbed in the must of the grape, in the juice. There's very different aspects that are reflected in the skin, and even different aspects reflected in the stem. And if we want a more complex reflection of place, then without maceration, it's not possible.
Yeah.
Then you're only getting a very fractured perception.
That's the same opinion. Gravner have the same opinion.
Yeah.
When he started to make the long macerated white wines, that because he realized, in his opinion, that macerated wines are more like the home picture of the terror, not only a small fraction.
That's such an interesting thought, because to me that's very counterintuitive, not philosophically, not in terms of the ethos, but in terms of the tasting aspect of
Yes.
things. Because as someone that tastes 1,000, 2,000 wines per month, a lot of them blind, if you give me knowing the color, if you give me an orange wine, personally, it's much more difficult to identify where it's from.
But here we have orange and orange. A lot of people are macerating wines without any care.
That is also very true. That is also very
I
true.
mean, I think making a generalization about orange wine would be a similar error to making a generalization about light browns or carbonic maceration or anything else.
You have a point.
There's wines that are good and there's wines that aren't. And there's a lot of growers from regions that haven't been making orange wines in recent history. They got excited about it and are doing experiments. And in the wine world, there's been a confusion that if you have slight volatile acidity, fizzy wine that's orange, it's extra natural. And I think this is a misunderstanding.
I agree.
You can have a very, not that some of those wines couldn't be also beautiful, but you can have a very well-crafted orange wine, just like a well-crafted red wine or a well-crafted white wine. But I do feel this is also probably the question how used you are to that genre and what qualitative examples have come across your palate. I think if you were to come to my place and taste 10 different cuvées from different years of orange wine and compare them side by side, you would understand the spectrum of diversity of flavor and expression is as great as any other genre of wine.
I think
I do think, if you go to 4 or 5 natural wine bars in LA or Copenhagen or other places, and you take an orange wine by the glass, it's often
The same thing.
a little bit this kind of wine that is a bit simple with a spirit of anarchy. And I love that definition. And I can promise you that there's wines as compelling and deep in that genre, or maybe even more so than any other genre out there.
I think you make a beautiful argument, but I think the other face of that, and you're gonna want to. I think you're gonna want to kill me after I say what I'm about to say, and I'm okay with that. But I'm here.
At least we won't do it on camera.
No, but I think it's wonderful that we discuss his ideas, because I have heard the argument. It wasn't mine, but I actually tend to agree with it, which is that and I would love your input on this too. In my opinion, the natural wine movement, lato sensu, generally speaking, in a way, did embrace orange wine as a thing that they wanted for themselves. And one of the reasons why I think that, and I'm thinking about markets, I'm thinking about businesses here, is that because in my opinion, orange wine, again, generally speaking, masks a lot of things. It also makes it much easier to tolerate a lot of the defects of poorly made natural wines.
I don't think so.
And so it's easier for you to drink a 0-0 wine that is orange than a 0-0 wine that is white, generally speaking. I've heard this argument before. It's not mine, and I tend to agree with it, okay? I would love for you guys to completely disagree with me with an argument that you find compelling.
It'll be easy to disagree.
Lovely.
First, Lisa.
Okay. A lot of things. First of all, I think the orange wine in the natural wine movement, it's because it's a traditional way to make wine. It's how people used to make wine, macerating white grapes. Of course, now we are talking 30, 40 years after about not only movement, but also a marketing. So we have a lot of things. There are not only people wanting to make orange wine because people used to make like that. We know. But also, if you think about all the stereotypes of natural wine movement, they are easy things to recognize as natural. I don't think you have to say that, well, orange, pet nat, carbonic maceration, fermentation, and glue wines are natural wines. No, that's not true. It's a part of it. It's a part of, it's a style. It not represent the movement.
You and I agree. You and I agree on that. We know that. But don't you think that in terms of business, don't you think that the movement in business have used that in order to push it forward?
Yes, but not because it's easier to not to see the faults.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if anything, it's just when orange wine became associated with something cool and almost a symbol of rebellion, a lot of wine bars wanted to put a orange wine on the menu by the glass without necessarily knowing.
Okay. So you agree with that?
I agree that it became a trend and that not every wine buyer and every bar or restaurant has the discretion or knowledge to choose. So they were looking at something that kind of fit the bill to put it on.
That's my point, exactly.
But my feeling is if you take a great master of wine, for instance, we take Christian Cheetah, and I don't think you could tell any difference in precision whether he's macerating or not. And he has wines without maceration, he has wines with maceration, and he doesn't even say this is white or this is orange. It's just a wine made by Christian Cheetah from a white grape. And in Georgia, it could be interesting to mention Georgia's not the only country that made orange wines. I agree with Liz. Probably 500 years ago, I think almost all wines processed anywhere in the world from white grapes would have been orange.
Yep.
To some degree. But Georgia managed to end up the country where normal wine is orange wine, and the rare exception is white, rosé, or red. And I've often thought, why? At least this is for the wines that Georgians themselves drink. The wines that were exported historically when they were part of the Russian Empire were often these more bombast, more boozy, more heavy wines. But the wines that Georgians like are always very fresh drinkability, wines that you could drink for hours at a meal, and wines that had an ability to go with a wide range of gastronomical flavors on the table. So the way Georgians traditionally eat, as Liz knows, she's had both the pleasure to be at these feasts and been the victim of them. But she's survived. She's a survivor. You have many different courses that come out on the table at once. So you might have cheese and fermented veggies and some trout, some sweetwater fish. You might have meat that just came in off the grill with tart sauces from sour cherry plums to very spicy sauces like the Georgian adjika. You have a lot of vegetable pâtés with walnut paste. And so you have this huge spectrum of flavors of hot, cold, protein, mushrooms, veggies, wild herbs on the table at once. And at the Georgian feast, it's not about doing a wine tasting. It's about connecting with people. So you need a wine that has that spectrum of the freshness of the white, but the skeleton that can work with smoke and chili and garlic and blood and fat. So I often make the comparison that the orange wines is a bit like a castrati singer that has a soprano all the way down to a bass in his voice. It's a range that's just much greater. And in that way, it can embrace many more flavors. But then you have to also make the effort to seek out a well-built horn dry, which there are a lot of, luckily.
I could not agree more. This is precisely my point, I think, at the beginning, which is if you're making a wine that is as versatile as what you're suggesting, you also have to agree that you're making a wine that is less, I'm going to say precise, but I want to mean in a box. You understand where I'm going?
I don't agree with the word precision, but you might say it's a wine that's less easy to pinch and hold.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
I don't think it's less precise.
I don't think it's more complex. I think it's more versatile.
And you have to take time to really see it, to really understand.
To let go of your preconceptions when you're tasting it.
Yes.
You know, really tasting it blindly, not even knowing the color, but taste it blindfoldedly. That's blind.
It's wonderful that you said that because I have a series on YouTube where I taste wines completely blind. People send me wines. I don't even know who sent it to me, which is awesome. And Liz was a part of two of these blind tastings in the past days. And we didn't even know the color. And the first wine, we just had the bottle like this, but it was, fully covered in foam without without the cork.
Yeah.
And so I gave it to Liz and said, "What is this?" And she said, "I think it's orange." And I was like, "Me too." And it was red. And it was quite interesting to say that. But then my question for us to end the episode is, and sorry, if you have a closing question, please feel free to. But my question is for people that don't know your wines and for people that are probably going to want to drink your wines after they listen to this episode, what would you say about the mindset that they should have in order to approach your wines for the first time?
On the mindset they should have when they approach a bowl of soup or a salad or a sunset, just an open heart and taste what's actually in the glass. And really, we don't have a particular style because in Georgia, there's so many different regions, so many different grapes. And our work as a winery was to share that dynamic diversity and spectrum. And I have friends that are making extraordinary wines like Jago Bitara Shrilia, Brahmas Nicoladze that are working only in one village, only with their grandfather's plots. And I could say really specific, like this is what a Jago Bitara Shrilia wine tastes like. But our function as a winery was to kind of break down the dam and let the water flow, to show people all these different possibilities. And that was the idea in the beginning, always stay true to it.
That's awesome. Do you want to add anything? You don't want to. That's, I mean, there's some answers, like the third one you gave that I was like, I was like kind of speechless, where it's just like, okay, after this, anything I say, I'm just gonna bring the quality of the episode down because it was just so magical. You're also an extremely articulated person, which is amazing because I could really you should write books, man.
Yeah, I don't have time for that yet.
You really should.
Maybe in another period of my life.
It's been a huge pleasure. I really thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Cheers.
Colaborativos.
Colaborativos.
So much.